Elderly woman confronts airline racism, buys the company, and demands change. The evening at JFK Airport was like any other, but it was a rare moment for Jamila. The hum of travelers and the loudspeaker announcements mixed with the scent of strong coffee from a nearby kiosk. The lighting overhead was harsh and sterile, and the floors echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps. People rushed through the terminal, business travelers, families, tourists, all locked in their own worlds, with only the quiet undercurrent of tension signaling that something bigger was always at play. For Jamila, it had always been like this. In some ways, airports symbolized the crossroads of everything she had been, a place of transitions, but also a reminder of the constant battles she had fought, often unseen, unnoticed. At 72, Jamila had long since learned how to navigate this world. She knew that every space she entered, even the most mundane ones, carried a certain weight. She didn't need to be overtly rebellious to demand respect, but she had grown accustomed to the quiet looks, the shifting gaze of someone who only half-heartedly saw her as a peer. She was tired of it. The life she had lived, full of grit and survival, had brought her to this moment. A first-class seat that she'd earned through hard work, sacrifice, and determination. A seat she wasn't about to let someone take away, no matter their age, their authority, or their assumptions about her. Jamila stood tall, her back straight, as she approached the counter. Her clothes were well chosen, a floral dress in shades of green, wrapped neatly with a matching headscarf. She'd always loved the color green. It was a subtle symbol of growth, of renewal, qualities that had been central to her journey. She was no longer a woman who had to fight for recognition or for a seat at the table. She had earned it. The attendant behind the counter didn't seem to see that. "Can I help you?" The attendant's voice was flat, almost dismissive. Her eyes barely lifted from her computer screen, and there was no trace of warmth in her tone. The way she looked at Jamila spoke volumes. It was as if Jamila were invisible, just another face in the crowd. "I'm here for my flight to Atlanta." "First class," Jamila replied, handing over her boarding pass with a quiet but firm determination. The attendant's fingers brushed over the keyboard, but her frown deepened with every click. She didn't look back up at Jamila, and it was then that Jamila realized something was off. "There seems to be an issue," the attendant murmured, her voice trailing off as she processed the information. Jamila felt the sharp sting of anticipation. She'd been down this road before, too many times to count. But this was different. This was her moment to stand firm, to make sure that she was seen. The attendant paused. Jamila saw the way she hesitated, the flicker of surprise in her eyes. "You're in economy," the attendant said, her words blunt and almost dismissive. "First class was given to someone else." There was no apology in her tone, just the cold finality of someone in control of the situation. The words felt like a slap to Jamila's face. She had been here before, treated as less than, disregarded for her race, her age, the quiet strength she carried. But she wasn't going to take it. Not now. Not today. "That's impossible," Jamila said, keeping her voice steady. Her heart beat faster, but she remained calm. "I paid for a first-class seat. I'm sitting in it." The attendant didn't respond immediately. There was a strange flicker of discomfort in her eyes as she looked at Jamila. She glanced down at the boarding pass, scanned it again. Then, with an almost imperceptible shrug, she muttered, "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do. You'll need to move to the back of the plane. Someone will escort you." Jamila's blood ran cold. She had heard this line before, too many times before, and each time she had walked away. But not today. Today, she would stand her ground. Jamila's life had been shaped by a series of quiet but deeply impactful moments, some of them triumphant, others tragic, but all of them necessary. Born and raised in the Deep South during the 1950s, she had grown up in a world that was explicitly designed to keep her, and others like her, silent, unseen, and invisible. From a young age, she was keenly aware of the color of her skin and how it determined the way she was treated. The blatant racist policies of the time, segregation, separate but equal, and the institutionalized hatred that permeated every facet of her world were daily obstacles for her family. But it was the quiet ones, the ones who didn't speak, but whose actions spoke louder than words, that Jamila would remember the most. Her parents were both educators, intellectuals in a society that often devalued education for black children. They had fought to become teachers in a segregated school system that viewed them as less than. Despite the obstacles, they taught Jamila the value of knowledge, self-worth, and perseverance. Her mother, in particular, imparted a lesson that Jamila would never forget. You are not what they say you are. You are who you choose to be. These words were a guiding principle, one that would fuel Jamila's determination to break down every wall built to keep her from succeeding. She worked hard throughout her youth, excelling academically despite being given fewer resources than her white peers. She would later earn her master's degree in social work, but her education came at a steep price. There were constant battles with professors who questioned her intellect, students who mocked her for taking up space, and institutions that tried to silence her voice. But Jamila wasn't one to back down. She had always been the one to push against the tide, to question the system that had never given her a fair chance. In her professional life, Jamila fought against the ingrained biases of social services. As a social worker, she witnessed firsthand how racism permeated every level of the system, denying black families access to resources, opportunities, and justice. But instead of becoming bitter or cynical, Jamila channeled her anger into action, working tirelessly to provide equitable care and support for communities that had been ignored by mainstream society. She became a leader in the civil rights movement, not through fiery speeches or public demonstrations, but through her quiet, persistent actions that made a difference on the ground. She married and raised 3 children, each of whom grew up to be successful in their respective fields. Yet, Jamila never allowed herself to rest on her laurels. She knew that the fight for equality was ongoing, that there were still battles to be won. Every victory, whether personal or professional, felt like a small but significant step forward in a long and difficult journey. Now, as she stood at the counter of the airport, the same racial prejudice that had once defined her childhood had once again made itself known. It wasn't as overt as it once was, but it was there nonetheless, hiding behind the polite but dismissive words of the young flight attendant. The same systemic issues that had tried to hold her back in her youth had simply found a new way to operate. But Jamila was no longer the young woman who would sit quietly in the back, hoping that the world would change on its own. She had changed the world in her own way, time and time again. And today, she was going to do it again. As Jamila stood her ground, the tension in the air grew thick. The attendants around her exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to handle a woman who refused to be intimidated. But Jamila's mind was sharp, focused. She had dealt with confrontation her entire life, whether in boardrooms or classrooms, in hospitals or government offices. She wasn't afraid to fight for what was right, and she wasn't going to back down now. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Alyssa, continued to fumble with the computer. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to do next. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but we can't just change things around. The seat's been given away. You're not listening," Jamila said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of a lifetime of unspoken truths. "I paid for that seat. I didn't just get it because of luck. I earned it. And you're going to make sure I sit in it." The attendant hesitated for a moment longer, then turned toward her supervisor. "I think we need help with this one," she said, her voice laced with discomfort. The supervisor, a tall man in his late 30s, walked over, trying to project an air of authority that felt more like a mask than anything genuine. He surveyed the situation for a brief moment before turning his gaze toward Jamila. "Ma'am, I understand that you're upset," he said, his voice stiff. "But the rules are clear. First class is full, and we can't just give out seats that aren't available. I'm afraid you'll need to sit in economy." "I don't need you to explain the rules to me," Jamila said, her eyes unwavering. "I've heard the rules my whole life. But I'm not interested in the rules today. I'm interested in fairness. And fairness means I'm sitting in my seat." The supervisor seemed to flinch, unsure how to respond. The other passengers were starting to notice. Some were starting to whisper, others were looking on with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. It wasn't often that someone stood up to an authority figure in such a public way, especially not with such quiet dignity. As the supervisor stood in silence, Jamila took a deep breath and made her move. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and dialed the customer service line. The attendants looked at each other, clearly unsettled by the shift in dynamics. Jamila wasn't just making a fuss, she was taking control. And that was the last thing they expected. "Hello, I need to speak with someone in your corporate office," Jamila said as the phone rang. "Immediately." The tension continued to rise and the supervisor was visibly sweating, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He knew that something was about to shift. Jamila was taking this situation far beyond what they had anticipated. The phone call rang a few times before someone picked up on the other end. Jamila's calm voice cut through the static, her words precise and unwavering. "Hello, I'm at JFK and I've been denied my paid first-class seat. I'm speaking with a flight attendant who insists my seat was given to someone else. I'm done being treated like this. I want to speak with someone in a position of power, now." The voice on the other end hesitated before responding, clearly caught off guard by the urgency in Jamila's tone. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll put you through to someone who can assist you." Jamila could hear the clicking of keys, the shuffle of papers. It was clear that the representative was trying to figure out how to handle this issue without causing a disruption. Jamila's patience thinned, but she stayed composed. She had been patient her entire life. Now, it was time for the world to listen. A moment later, the call transferred to a more senior-sounding voice. "This is Carla with Customer Relations. I understand you're having an issue with your seat. What seems to be the problem?" "I've been waiting for this moment," Jamila said, her voice calm, but every word laced with authority. "I'm not going to stand by and let you dismiss me like you've done to countless others. I paid for a first-class seat, and I'm sitting in it. If you think for a second that I'll just let this slide, you're mistaken." Carla's tone faltered slightly. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but there's nothing I can do about the seat. The flight is fully booked. I suggest you sit in economy or we can—" "No," Jamila interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm not here to debate seats. I'm here to tell you that I'm buying your airline. I'm purchasing enough stock to become a major shareholder. And when I do, I'll make sure this never happens again." For a moment, there was complete silence on the line. It was a silence that stretched far longer than it should have. Jamila could hear Carla's breath on the other end, trying to process what she had just heard. Jamila had no time for the awkward fumbling of corporate procedures. This was personal now, and she was taking control. "You're not serious," Carla finally managed to say, but her disbelief was met with a tone from Jamila that had no room for doubt. "Oh, I'm serious," Jamila replied. "You can handle this however you like, but understand this. When I own this airline, I'll make sure every employee from the top down understands what respect looks like. I will change the way people like me are treated, and this right here will be the start." Carla stammered. "Ma'am, we can escalate this situation to a manager immediately." "But I don't believe—" "Escalate it all you want," Jamila said, her voice unwavering. "I'm done asking. I'm done pleading for respect. Now I'm taking what's mine." The line went quiet again, and Jamila's heart pounded in her chest. The world around her seemed to slow as she realized the weight of what she had just done. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for all the people who had been silenced. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her where she belonged. She had earned her place in the world, and she would take it. The manager came on the phone moments later, and Jamila didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Listen, I'm buying this company. I've already started the process. You will make sure I sit in that first-class seat, and then I'm going to buy enough shares to change this entire company from the inside out." Jamila's boldness had shaken the airline's corporate structure to its core. The notion of a black woman, especially one her age, standing up and demanding not only her due respect, but also corporate power was a concept they hadn't considered. But Jamila was not one to be underestimated. "I'll make sure this matter is handled immediately," the manager said, though it was clear that he wasn't fully grasping the gravity of Jamila's words. But Jamila wasn't waiting for permission. She had made her decision. Her voice softened. But it was just as commanding. "I'll be sitting in that seat, and when I do, you'll be hearing from my lawyer." The next few days felt like a blur of legal calls, stock purchases, and media attention. The story of the elderly black woman at JFK standing up against an airline for the dignity and respect she deserved spread like wildfire across the media. Social media buzzed with hashtags in support of Jamila, and news outlets were quick to pick up the story, dubbing her the first-class fighter who had taken on corporate America and won. Jamila, who had long operated behind the scenes in the world of civil rights and social justice, was suddenly thrust into the public eye in a way she had never anticipated. But she wasn't intimidated. She had seen the world change before her eyes, slowly, sometimes painfully, but she had seen it change. This time, the change was happening on her terms. She didn't just settle for media attention. She took immediate action. Within days, Jamila had accumulated enough shares in the airline to become one of the largest stakeholders. It was a strategic and calculated move, something she had learned to do throughout her life when faced with adversity. But she wasn't just buying stock. She was buying the power to enforce change. As the stock market reacted to her surprise acquisition, the airline's leadership began to scramble. Board members who had once dismissed her, thinking she was just another aggrieved passenger, now had to contend with her newfound corporate presence. The airline's legal team contacted her, but Jamila was no longer the meek passenger they had once thought she was. She was the one holding the cards now. The board of directors called an emergency meeting, and Jamila, with the help of her legal team, secured a seat at the table. It was surreal, but Jamila knew she had to be there. She wasn't there to fight just for herself. She was fighting for every person who had been treated like they didn't belong in spaces that they had paid to be in. In that meeting, Jamila demanded changes. She pushed for racial sensitivity training for all employees, flight attendants, ground staff, and executives alike. She insisted on a thorough review of the airline's policies and procedures regarding customer complaints and the treatment of passengers, especially those from marginalized groups. Most importantly, she made it clear that no one would be treated as she had been. Jamila was no longer just an activist. She was now a force in the corporate world. Her influence over the airline's decisions grew, and it wasn't long before the company began implementing sweeping changes. Employees were required to undergo sensitivity training, and the company publicly acknowledged the issues of racism that had plagued its customer service operations. In addition, Jamila pushed for the establishment of a new program that would offer support to customers who felt they had been mistreated by the airline. But Jamila didn't stop there. The media coverage of her victory had sparked conversations around the country about systemic racism in corporate spaces, and Jamila became an influential voice in advocating for diversity and inclusion. The actions she took within the airline were just one part of a larger movement. The public response to her actions was overwhelmingly positive. People from all walks of life, from the working class to high-powered CEOs, stood in solidarity with Jamila. Her fight for justice had ignited a fire in others, showing them that they, too, had the power to demand change, no matter where they stood. Jamila's story is one of remarkable courage and perseverance. It's a story that transcends the individual moment at JFK Airport and speaks to a larger issue, one that touches the lives of countless people who have been made to feel less than, to feel invisible. Jamila refused to accept that she didn't deserve respect. She took her rightful place at the front of the plane, but more importantly, she took her rightful place in history. Now, what about you? Have you ever faced a situation where you were dismissed, ignored, or told that you didn't belong? What did you do in that moment? Did you stand up for yourself? Did you let the world see you for who you truly are? Jamila's fight is a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the world around us. It's not enough to sit quietly in the back of the plane and hope things get better. Change happens when we take action, when we demand that the world see us, hear us, and respect us. We want to hear your stories. If you've ever fought for your seat at the table, if you've ever stood up in the face of injustice, share your experience with us in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and inspire others to take action. And if Jamila's story inspired you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The world needs more people who are willing to take a stand. people like Jamila, who refuse to be silent and demand the respect they've always deserved.